Baxi's musical podcast is brought to you by Canna Provisions. Canna Provisions is an adult-use cannabis dispensary with the largest selection of cannabis products in Western Massachusetts, with locations both in Holyoke and in Lee. They offer warm, unique shopping experience with guides rather than bud tenders. In fact, they're not just a dispensary, they're a destination. Visit cannaprovisions.com. That's cannaprovisions.com. Adults 21, please, and please consume responsibly. And now, Baxi's musical podcast with my guest, Bob Mould from Husker Du.
It's Baxi's musical podcast.
In September of 2020, I interviewed Bob Mould from the band Husker Du. The problem I have with Bob is this. He keeps putting out records that I want to own. Between the 6 albums that Husker Du released between 1982 through 1987, to the records he released with the band Sugar, to his 15 different solo albums and various side projects, and his massive 24-CD box set called Distortion, 1989 through 2019, which came out during the pandemic, there is simply nothing that I do not own. In fact, I even own multiple copies of each album in some cases. It's a real sickness. Of course, if Bob hadn't released so much great music over the last 40 years, I probably wouldn't have this problem. But I do. And of course, Bob Mould has just released a new 3-song EP called The Ocean. And of course, it's great because it always is. Bob is currently on the road with his solo electric tour, which he's finally getting a chance to promote his last full-length album called Blue Hearts, plus the box set. In fact, he's coming through this area at the Hawks and Reed Performing Arts Center in Greenfield, Massachusetts on Sunday, May 22nd. It's going to be a hell of a night, which is why it is always so great to the guy who has made me so broke. This is my guest, Bob Mould, from Husker Du on Baxi's musical podcast.
Hey, Mike, it's Bob Mould. How are you?
Great, Bob. How are you?
Oh, doing okay, thanks. I'm in Newton, New Jersey. It's a little bit of a mad scramble. It's the first show of the trip.
That's got to be pretty cool. I mean, you're getting back on there. I know you just tested. Didn't you just test positive for COVID not that long ago?
Yeah, I had a run of dates in April. I had 15 shows, and after show 13, the evening after show 13, I tested positive. It was the second test of that day as well, so I'm glad I had enough sense to know that I probably was getting sick. So I had to pull the last 2 shows to reschedule for later in the year, but now resuming for the month of May and all the month of June, and some work in July and more coming in October.
I'm glad you're okay. I had it in December, literally the day after Christmas. My wife and I both got it. And we were knocked on our ass for a good 10 days. So there's one thing I've learned about COVID. I never want to get it a second time. So I'm glad you're doing well, and I'm glad you're back on the mend and on the road again. How awesome is that?
It's great. This is how the majority of musicians make their living, is by selling tickets. And, so there's the practical matter of touring. Then there's also, the spiritual part. This is what I do with my life. This is how I tell stories. This is how I try to build community and do all the good stuff that music can do. And so, yeah, it's great to be back. In the Northeast, it's a little touch and go at the moment. Things are starting to heat up again with the spread, and I think we're all going to try to do the right thing and do the best we can and see if we can get through this.
The last time I spoke to you, you were just about to release the box set, and I debated for all of 6 seconds whether or not I was going to go and buy it. And of course, I did immediately. I got the autographed copy of it. In fact, I'm looking at it right now, all 24 CDs. So it ain't just tickets. It's also when I decide to buy a box set. I hope that puts a meal on your table, or get you a bus ride somewhere. I hope I've contributed in some way.
Mike, you certainly have. First and foremost, all the proceeds like that usually go towards health insurance.
Yeah, well. And clearly there are times when you need it. So that's I'm glad to help. But what it boils down to is, so a lot of the things on the box set I already owned. So I now own literally everything that you've ever released. So I'm going to implore you, could you please just slow down a little bit? I'm not sure I can handle much more Bob Mould financially.
Oh yeah, I know those box sets are crazy. I mean, you purchased the 24 CD with the signed screen print, which is
Awesome.
an awesome package. For people who may or may not know, there's there's 4 other box sets out there, the 4 iterations of vinyl box sets. That's real deep if you get in that deep water. But yeah, the Distortion box set was something that's been talked about for years with Demon Records. They're a UK label. They're affiliated with the BBC, and I worked with them on the Silver Age album in 2012. I worked with them on the Sugar reissues in 2012, and we stayed in touch, and they really wanted to do, a big edition like the one that you have. And I kept putting it off, because I felt like, well, I'm sort of really, really busy with my current stuff. But yeah, so we had it earmarked for 2020, and, Blue Hearts, which was the current album that came out at the same time as the box set, that was more of a quick, down and dirty sort of inspired by the politics of the time, punk rock album. So all of it fit together really nicely, I think.
It definitely did, and like you said, when we talked about it last time, some of these songs were held over from Sunshine Rock, but yet they still applied because, like you said, the mood of the country, the George Floyd stuff, the Donald Trump years, it all kind of led into a very different type of mood than you had been experiencing in your recording career. I mean, most people would say the Sunshine Rock album was the happy Bolt of Bob Mould, but Blue Hearts was back to the angry, embittered Bob Mould that we all enjoy.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, that's.
I would agree with that. Yeah, there were a few political moments on Sunshine Rock, but that record was all about healing and trying to find some happiness after a couple dark years and some darker records. And yeah, Blue Hearts, again, it was just so much of it was the frustration of coming back to the U.S. in late 2019 and looking at this landscape that was eerily familiar to me. Yeah. Especially from the early 80s, the first Reagan administration, the beginning of the beginning of HIV and the neglect that went for years on that. Yeah, I mean, it's all, deja vu all over again, as they say.
You picked a couple of songs from Blue Hearts to be on this new EP, The Ocean. First of all, the title track, The Ocean, and then Forecast of Rain. But what you also did in this EP, and I think this is really very, very cool, is you picked a song from Flip Your Wig, Divide and Conquer. And I went back to look at the lyrics, because I know you didn't just pick a random song out of nowhere in the Husker Du arsenal. You did it for a reason. Yep. I looked at the lyrics, and it's like, it's pretty prophetic because, those lyrics really still apply to what's going on in the world today. It was a really interesting choice on your part.
Yeah, very, very conscious choice. I mean, Divide and Conquer was somewhat prescient, compared to, a song like Makes No Sense at All that's, an evergreen, I guess. Yeah, Divide and Conquer is a favorite of mine. That was I remember writing that song in 1984 and in an alleyway in Newport, Kentucky, on a banjo I had just bought at a pawn shop, and those words still ring true. I don't think any of us could have predicted the internet as it is at the moment, but the idea of hooking up the global village. I mean, that's a Marshall McLuhan theory that had been around, and I was a student of his writing, and I was in college. So yeah, it's all these same ideas about authority and power and control and education and all of the things that make up our lives, and how much say do we get as people, and how much power or lack of power does one person get in a lifetime.
I've also looked at the set list of what you're touring with, and there's a lot for everybody in that set list. I mean, not only a lot of Husker Du, but there's Sugar and a lot of your solo stuff. And when I saw that you were coming to the Hawks and Reed Performing Arts Center in Greenfield, I actually had to do a double take because this is like the biggest show they've ever had there. And you're choosing a lot of very intimate venues, which is really, for a fan, I mean, I like the fact that it's going to be me, a bunch of people, and Bob Mould. I like that as opposed to me, 10,000 people, and Bob Mould. I like that a whole lot more.
Indeed. The solo electric touring is really fun. It's pretty portable, so I can do a lot of it. The set list, I feel like I've fallen into a pretty good groove. I hope I can shake it up a little bit by the time I get to Greenfield. But if it's the set that you've seen online, it's a pretty comprehensive set. A lot of recent material from the last decade. A lot of recognizable songs from across the whole timeline. A good amount of workbook. Good amount of Husker. It's a really, really, really fun show, and I think it tells a good story. When you see the show, you'll get a better sense of the pacing and the tenor and the tone of the show. It's a lot of fun.
I don't think anyone's going to walk away disappointed. And the one and only time that I've seen you was back in the 80s. I think you guys, it would have been like 85, maybe 86. I'm trying to remember what it was about there, and it was one of the loudest shows I had ever seen, and it was fantastic. And I absolutely loved seeing you guys play live. And I remember when Workbook came out, and there were some Husker Du fans that were kind of perplexed by it because, it's such a tuneful and thoughtful album in a way that people were not used to. But I remember listening to that album and being like mesmerized from the very, very beginning and saying, this is a guy who's trying to put some of that aside and really try to peel himself away from everything that he had done. And I think had you not done that, I wonder where your career would have gone, because you have always tried to do that. And you've grown so much as a songwriter as a result of what happened on that first solo record.
You are almost 100% correct. I can dial in my thoughts with leaving Husker Du at the beginning of 1988. The last thing that was on my mind was making another record that sounded like the band I had just departed from. Why would I leave a band like Husker Du only to try to do that again right away? Workbook was the product of 18 months of solitude on a farm in northern Minnesota, with a couple new guitars and a lot of folkways records, a lot of Appalachian music and Celtic music, and digging back through folk music from over the eras, and a lot of relearning how to play guitar. A little bit more finesse, more articulation. The words, a lot of it was written as free verse or short stories that I would write music for, as opposed to, 4-line stanzas that rhyme consistently on top of a pop song. All those forms are valid and fun, but Workbook was a real period of discovery for me, and I did want to make it clear that it was my singular identity. Having said that, as time went on, I think with Sugar, there were similarities to Husker Du. I think when people see it was a power trio and, loud, aggressive, sometimes really fast, all the time pretty heavy. Maybe people were like, oh, he's going, a little return to form. And, after that, a couple solo records that were, very, very singular voice. That the electronica period in the early 2000s, and the balance of the 2000s easing back into the more familiar guitar-driven pop music, and in 2012, when revisiting the 20-year anniversary of Copper Blue and the simultaneous release of Silver Age, I think that was the beginning of this last decade. A real incredible run of albums. I'm sort of shocked that we went 5 for 5.
No,
How'd that happen?
I mean, that I was going to say, to me, the most amazing, period has been, Silver Age, Beauty and Ruin, Patch of Sky, and Sunshine Rock, and Blue Hearts too. But it's like, those first two albums in that grouping, they're still some of my go-to albums. Of all the things you do, I find myself listening to Silver Age and Beauty and Ruin a lot, and the Hubcap album too. I think that's the other one that really sits very, very well in the Bob Mould solo history. Real strong record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, with Hubcap, that was that was in the wake of the the demise of Sugar, and it was very, very different, singular. Again, grabbing that singular voice, and it was much darker, sort of informed by a lot of the lo-fi music that was happening at the time. But with Silver Age, I mean, that was that's just those 5 records starting with Silver Age. It's like a textbook example of a team effort. I mean, I'm leading the charge, I'm writing the songs, I'm directing traffic, but to have Jason Narduzzi on bass and John Worster on drums, all of the the consistency of the musicians on the records, all of the touring that we did, and also Bo Sorensen, who engineered all 5 records. That it's a great team, and I like being the captain of a team that's that strong.
I was looking at the discography a little bit, and it occurred to me that over the next 5 years, all 6 of those Husker Du albums will be celebrating their 40th anniversary. Have there been any discussions about anything that you guys might do for that, or any re-releases of that music, or is that kind of all been done for you?
I mean, right now Husker Du LLC is represented by an attorney in the Twin Cities. Everybody works with the attorney, and we share ideas, and there's always different discussions about what to do, whether it's for, anniversaries or, benchmarks like that, like you mentioned. In 2017, when Numero put out the Savage Young Do box set, I would say that is about as good a package as anybody could have done with the unheard music. In terms of things that are still commercially available, and trying to compile things for anniversaries, not any serious talk, but again, there's always discussion about different projects, and I'm the kind of guy, I'm sort of loath to get into details in public until things are actually about to happen. It's the nature of the world these days.
Isn't that just about the most rock and roll answer you can give? That everything is under the control of an attorney. That says it all right there.
It's no different than a band having a manager. So it just is.
Right. I was one of the things I did do in preparing for the interview. I watched a video that you had done for Amoeba Records, the "What's in My Bag" video, and you picked up a couple of my favorites, the Buzzcocks and Richard and Linda Thompson, you Stood at the Lights, and Loveless by My Bloody Valentine. But then you also picked out an album that I wound up getting on your recommendation, and I was just freaking floored by it, and that's Ultra Pop by The Armed. My God, what a great freaking album that was!
Just isn't the whole presentation and the package and just the look and feel of it. It's really, really amazing vision that The Armed have. They're for people who don't know, The Armed are sort of a music, art, visual collective in the Detroit area. And, I have not seen the band live. I've met a couple of the folks in the band, and they're sweethearts. But I haven't seen them live, and that's where people say that it's just completely mind-blowing, the intensity of the live show. So I hope to see them, and I'm glad that you like the record.
I love the record, and it's a real noisy, dense, compressed record, but the melodies of those songs are actually beautiful. I mean, those songs could have been applied in nearly any genre, and they'd be fantastic. But it's a noisy, heavy record.
Yeah, lots of when I talk with the folks from the band, they're like, "Yep, distortion on almost everything, all the time." I was like, "Well, yeah, I love that."
Yeah, well, it almost sounds like they took a page from Husker Du.
I think they've heard some of Husker Du. Yeah.
I think there's a chance that Candy Apple Grey has been passed around from member to member of that band. I think that's a possibility.
No, that's a nice thought. That's nice.
I also did a little bit of research. Back in the '80s, you co-founded a record label, single only label with Steve Fallon from Coyote, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is you released some things from Moby. I think Mojo Nixon was on it, Morphine, but also R. Stevie Moore. And the reason that leapt up at me is I literally just interviewed him last week, and I've become a big fan of the guy because this is a guy who's recorded like 400 of his own albums, and it's quirky and bizarre, but pure genius at the same time. I mean, were you a fan of his, or did you know much about him?
Well, singles only label, as you mentioned, it was myself and Steve Fallon, who was the booker at Max, the booker and the owner and the visionary of Maxwell's legendary club in Hoboken, New Jersey, in the 80s in particular, but also 90s and beyond. There was a third partner as well. His name is Nicholas Hill. He was an on-air talent, I believe, at, oh my gosh, I can't remember if it was WFMU or WFUV. Sometimes I get the two mixed up, but I think it was FMU, or in suburban New York over New Jersey.
In New Jersey, right?
And Nick Hill would have been I think he brought R. Stevie Moore to singles only label. So pretty prolific guy.
One of the things I want to ask you about, because I know that you've had, with COVID and the shutdown, and you weren't, like you said, you weren't performing because there was no place to go. Were you spending a lot of time writing during that time, or is that just hard to just kind of sit down and write, or is it a real discipline for you?
There wasn't a whole lot of good stuff to write about, and one thing when anybody is making art is you have to defend your thesis, and you have to live with the work that you've done. And the idea of a pandemic, it reminds me in a way of when I was little and I would ask my grandparents about the Depression, and they would get this glazed over look on their face and sort of not really want to talk about anything. So there's a little bit of that. A fair amount of my creative energy in 2020 and the first part of 2021 really went into wrapping up the box sets, putting all this, the work into Blue Hearts. So it felt like 2020, I was pretty much at home, either generating content for the box sets alongside the folks at Demon, or I was working with the folks at Merge, promoting Blue Hearts. And, it was a rough stretch for me. I mean, to sort of try to dial in why it was tough. The isolation, the lack of being able to defend my thesis in public. And I guess what I mean by that is my typical cycle throughout my life has been open up the box of, scraps of paper and all the notes that I keep and the ideas that come to me day to day, and sit with them and start assembling them and see if I can find a handful of songs that create a theme that reflects, the time. And once I do that, I start doing home recordings, and then I get the band together and we go to a studio, we record, we master the record. And then there's a period of time between signing off on everything and the release date. So, then we make videos, we do press, and then go on the road. And going on the road is the validation of all of the other work that I just mentioned. That's when that's the thesis, that's the review. And I take it in front of people and I see their reaction to the material, and, that completes a cycle. So my cycle for Blue Hearts never got completed in 2020. So it was tough for me to figure out where to go next. Having said that, now in fall of 2021, the band, me, Jason, John, went out and we did a North American tour under tough circumstances. and we got through it healthy, and we got some of that validation, some of that peer review or the feedback from the crowd. And this current year, 2022, with the solo touring, it's a continuation of getting out in front of people and seeing how the material works. And, and hopefully, when in the best of situations, being able to talk with fans and just get that feedback, and that helps me get the next cycle started. So, a long answer to a short question. I've been writing, but with no real direction.
Right.
I'm hoping when I wrap up this touring, I'll be able to go home and open up the box of scrapbooks and notes and junk and put it all together, and hopefully it'll make sense to me.
I mean, it's a long answer, but it makes perfect sense. You're purging art from yourself, and then you want to display it. Until you get that out of your system, it's kind of, I would assume it's just kind of hard to focus on the next thing when you're still focused on that over there. I would assume that all part of a larger cycle.
Yeah, I mean, and that cycle really started to make itself known to me in the 90s. When I was in my 20s during the 1980s with Husker Du, it felt like we were always an album ahead of ourselves. I remember times when we were still touring Zen Arcade, and we were playing not only things that would be on New Day Rising, but ideas that found light in, with Candy Apple, with Flip Your Wig. So we used to Husker Du would get pretty far ahead of themselves because they're, two very prolific songwriters. It was different in the 80s, but I think with, starting with the solo work, and especially with Sugar, the long-winded answer to a life cycle of a project that I just gave to you, that's when that started to take shape.
Yeah. Well, I know I don't have a whole lot of time with you, but I appreciate you spending the time that you did. I've been on your bandwagon for an awful long period of time, and it's always great to have you back on the road again. You'll be at the Hawks and Reed Performing Arts Center in Greenfield on the 22nd, I believe it is, and it's going to be great. So, Bob, always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope we can do it again sometime and spend a little bit more time together.
Absolutely, Mike, and thanks as always for the help in spreading the word. And we'll see everybody in Greenfield on the 22nd.
Sounds great, Bob. Thank you so much.
All right, take care, Mike.
Take care. Bye. Again, the name of the new EP from Bob Mould is called The Ocean. Like we said, Bob will be playing at the Hawks and Reed Performing Arts Center in Greenfield, Massachusetts on May 22nd. I hope you enjoyed the interview. Feel free to share it with everyone you know. Thanks again to Canna Provisions for their support. You can support them by going to one of their locations in Holyoke or in Lee, or go to cannaprovisions.com. And you can email me at backstoryrock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. And thanks again for listening to Backseat's Musical Podcast.